Morning, hello there, or good afternoon. Hair's a mess, it doesn't matter. Thinking about a case of Baby K and something I've been talking with Jenny about, who comments, Jenny Jar at Jar942, with regard to what the actual story might have been there. And as we saw in Dr. Shuli's presentation, he really goes after, he doesn't name the consultant. He says, oh, well, the consultant didn't know what he was doing. I'm not so sure. And I think in discussing it with Jenny, I believe that Jenny stroke Jar, who was a nurse of several decades work and great experience. I agree with her that I think in some ways he knew what was happening. I think he heard the alarms. This is the story. This is what I think could have been the actual series of events. It wasn't that he didn't know what had happened. He knew all too well. When he heard the alarms, he realised that there'd been a traumatic failure to intubate the baby properly, or rather, it had been a traumatic event. There were 3 attempts at it, obviously causing trauma to the baby, and that he knew he'd put in an undersized endotracheal tube, size 2, and it should have been a larger one. When he heard the alarms, it was an alarm to him that, oh God, it hasn't worked. This is what the outcome has been. I've messed up here. So he goes straight in there. I think Nurse Caroline Oakley is in there, and that's the only person that's in there. Nurse Caroline Oakley, from reading about this, says she has no memory of the night or the event or the incident at all. Has no memory of Baby K at all. That's kind of convenient. I understand that. Well, she's probably done that. It might be that she's genuinely has no memory of it. But I think it's more the case that she's seen what's happened to Lucy Letby and thinks, I can't go anywhere near this, and doesn't want to say anything about it, which is a pity if that is the case. Or it might be that she genuinely can't remember. And it's hard to know because we weren't there. So a lot of this is supposition, but I think there's a good reason to think this might be what's really happened is that, and I think Jenny's on the same, Jenny who comments on many videos and took part in the live video that we did recently and is brilliant in all the research and comments that she's making and all the help from a medical point of view, and great supporter of Lucy, obviously. Is that Jayaram hears the alarms, he goes in there, he knows he's got to kind of rectify, he knows that it's because, and this is where I'm deviating from where I'm thinking Dr. Chu Lee's view of it, is that he didn't know what he was doing. He didn't know that tube and the 94% air leak would be the problem. I think he knew it all too well. He knew it all too well and realised that he's responsible for the desaturation. He's responsible in conjunction with the other doctor that he was supervising doing it. And I know Dr. Shu Lee says there was an unsuccessful or a poor supervision, and they took 3 attempts to intubate Baby K. So when he's in there, and this is what Jenny says as well, he's panicking. He's in a panic mode. He's trying to help the baby. Lucy Letby's not in the room at all. Nurse Oakley's there, and he's doing that, and then he uses he takes the tube out, and then he uses the neopuff. I don't believe him that he thinks the tube's dislodged. I think he knows he's just trying to get the levels up again, and then he uses the neopuff, and it doesn't work. It's not sufficient, and then and this is what Dr. McConville confirmed in the podcast that I listened to last night, and this is what I wasn't sure about. I should have been, but I'd forgotten the detail. When he re-intubates the baby, he uses a 2.5 millimeter endotracheal tube, and that's what makes the difference, and that's what brings the SATs up, because there's obviously not so much of it. There's not the 94% air leak there, and that's what he should have done in the first place, and shouldn't have had those multiple attempts and the poor supervision of the other junior doctor with that baby originally causing the air leak that caused the crash. So he knows what's happened. He knows that he's responsible for that desaturation. Him as a doctor, he knows he's responsible. Then you've got the issue of Nurse Williams coming back in. Nurse Williams says at the trial that he asked her who was in here, who was in here. So but Jayaram says, "Oh, I don't remember asking her that. I don't. It's the old I don't remember thing, rather than I didn't say that. It's the same with the alarms, isn't it? It's not quite the same. But when he says in the police interviews, he says, I don't know if there were any alarms. I don't know. And then later he's absolutely certain that there were not, because it has to fit in with his later confection, his later story. So what he does then, and this is it, because the idea of his later story of seeing Lucy Letby there doing nothing and it's all her fault, and he believes, and he's hysterical before he goes in, that's what prompts him to go there, not the alarms. It's some kind of awareness, sudden awareness that the baby's in danger, and Lucy Letby's there on her own, even though she's not in the room at all. She's not there at all, and he's got no reason to believe it. It's the alarm that brings him there. He says later, I'm sure there wasn't any alarms, because he can't have the alarms now. He can't have the alarms. Bear with me. I'm going somewhere. The implausibility, the absolute implausibility, unbelievability that the story that he ends up telling, and that ends up being a conviction for attempted murder, is so implausible that it has to be covering something else. And what it's covering is the full knowledge that he knew that he was responsible for that desaturation because of the poor medical treatment, because using the wrong endotracheal tube. Not so much what Dr. Shu Lee's saying, he just didn't know what he's doing and he's all confused and he just didn't have the skill. He knows. But he then later has to create this story. And it has to be a story, because the reality, it has to be a made-up story what he creates later, because it's totally implausible. It's totally implausible that he would keep it to himself. That's why it has to be made up. And it has to be covering something else, which is his own guilt about what's happened to Baby K. His own guilt about it. The reason he makes up this other story later is because it's opportune to do it. 13 months or even longer afterwards. He then brings it onto the table because it's just something else that can try to help get this thing over the line, to get the police involved. After it's all been worked out by Breer and all the other ones, all joining in to identify these deaths and crashes and reframe them as somebody else's fault. So he's just adding another one. He's adding another one to the table in the same way that Dr. Z.A. rings up Breery, and then Breery apparently discovers it a year later, those tests. At the time, they didn't mean anything. At the time, those tests were put aside as though they didn't mean anything, as though they weren't worth thinking about or following up. And then Dr. Z.A. says at the third, I should have done. I should have followed it all up, and I regret it now. It's all fake. It's all fake. They put it to the side because they knew it didn't mean anything, because the baby's gone home. The baby, because they know the test was unreliable, because that amount of insulin, the baby couldn't have survived it, that level. Talking about baby F particularly, but both of them. Yes, there was a problem, and I understand the way it was described about giving the boluses of the dextrose as opposed to the continual infusion. I understand that. But there was obviously interference and contamination there as well, to create this ridiculously, or as Dr. Taylor says, this stupidly high level that is just unfeasible. At the time, when those tests came back, Dr. Z.A. sees them for baby F and does nothing with them. And it's the same reason, and with baby K, Dr. Jayaram he knows the real story of it, and it implicates him. It implicates him, and he switches it all round afterwards. And that's why this is why his story is implausible. This is why his story is implausible, because if it was true, it's just unfeasible that he would keep it to himself. And it's a circle you can't square. He can't square it. You've got to make up some stupid, silly excuse. Oh, I didn't know what to do. I didn't have the training for it. We don't know how to do it. Oh, the management would have been upset if I would have mentioned that I just witnessed an attempted murder. So I had to keep it to myself for 13 months. No, because it didn't happen like that. Because he's responsible for the desaturation, and he knew he was at the time. Well, that's to crystallize it. He knew it was at the time, and that's why he keeps quiet about it. That's why he doesn't say anything about it. Not because he's caught somebody red-handed and then completely implausibly keeps that to himself, but plausibly, absolutely, not understandably in a good way, but, with his psychology, you can understand, with him being who he is, what he is, the narcissist that he is, the liar that he is, keeps it to himself that it was his responsibility, the desaturation. And he knew it was, and he had insight into it. It's not as simple as the idea the consultant didn't know what he was doing. But he may not have known what he was doing or thought about the ramifications of what he was doing before, but he had insight into what he had done and the effect of it when that alarm went off and he went in there and saw that the desaturation down to 40%. He knew that then. And that's why he would keep it to himself. I wouldn't say anything about until there's a moment 13 months down the line when everyone else is joining in on this campaign of bullying and persecution, when it becomes useful to flip this story 180 into something else, into something in which he's the heroic figure, stopping a serial killer, actually going fully through with it. And he's the hero then. And then he can tell everybody the world, even though he's had this 13-month period of grace while he's kept it to himself. I believe that this could well be the case. I believe that's more likely it than he just didn't know what he was doing. And so the fake story of Jayaram is the fake story when he says, nobody believes this, I'm sure they don't. When he says, I was hysterical, I didn't know and I thought I must be going crazy, I'm sitting there, I shouldn't be, I've got to go in there just to prove that the serial killer isn't trying to kill another baby, essentially. I'm hysterical. It's rubbish. That's all backfilling. That's all completely made up theatrical storytelling nonsense. And I think, and it is a supposition, he was not hysterical, but he was very elevated in his mood there and in his state of mind, but for a different reason. Because he knew when he went in there, because he heard the alarm, and that's what brought him in the room. He heard the alarm. It wasn't, I don't believe, I have a difference of opinion with Pauline Ralph, whose video is absolutely stunning and brilliant, and I love the work that she's done. But I don't think it's a case of him mistaking mistaking Nurse Oakley for Lucy Letby. I don't think that comes into it. I think he knows he's responsible for the desaturation. And it's just later down the line, he sees the opportune moment to tell a different story about that event. And then to, like, moving a pawn across, or whatever chess piece into the room, he just puts Lucy Letby there and tells a different story about what happened that night. Tells a different story. Lucy Letby was looking after two babies in another room, and it's possible she came later on after the alarm was there. And then, I believe Nurse Williams when she said that Jayaram asked him who was here. Okay, let's go with that. Let's just say that is absolutely true, and he did ask her that. What's his motivation for asking that? If he's all hysterical and he's got it in his mind as a previous idea when he's at that desk saying, I'd better go in because somebody said Nurse Lucy Letby is babysitting that baby, even though she wasn't. She was in another room. So this is very much what I think this is, I believe, from what discussing it with Jenny at JAR 942, I believe we're on a similar sort of mind to this, in a similar sort of, take a similar viewpoint. So here we have a situation in which, like with Baby O, there's insight there from Breary. There's knowledge there. There's conscious knowledge and insight that he's partly responsible for the death of Baby O, at least to a degree. I know we've got listening to the Dr. Michael McConville podcast, you've got the birth injury, but you've also got the injury with the cannula as well. That Breary knows. He's got insight into it. He knows it. Like Dr. Taylor said, if it was him who'd done it, he wouldn't be able to sleep at night. But Breary probably can sleep. And the nightmares of Jayaram. If there is a trouble in his mind, if he is troubled by anything, he's used that. This is the complication. This is the complexity of his pathology. Actually, the pathology of Jayaram is that perhaps he was haunted by because he knows Baby K died 3 days afterwards, and perhaps the Baby K wouldn't have died if the baby had been properly intubated and hadn't had that traumatic intubation. Three attempts at it, and then with a tube that was too small, which led to the major desaturation, which probably precipitated 3 days afterwards the Baby K's death. And if there is any nightmare about it, about that night, it's to do with himself. It's to do with his failure and his insight into his failure, not to do with Lucy Letby. He's put her there so he can absolve himself. He's placed her there when she's not even in the room so he can absolve himself. It's more than him just jumping to a false conclusion about something and misremembering or misidentifying someone. He's literally put someone else there so he can step out and say, well, it wasn't me. It wasn't me, like that song. It wasn't me. It wasn't me. I was the one that saved the situation. And then I was tortured. And so I was so tortured, I couldn't speak about it for 13 months. The unbelievability of that is explained now, is explainable, I should say, and understandable because he's covering up his own insight to his own actions and how they precipitated the major crash of Baby K, which in all likelihood led to, once Baby K has been transferred to the level 3 unit, led to Baby K's death. So that's what I wanted to say. Anyway, take care, everyone. All the best.